They dazzled us on the silver screen icons of beauty, charm, and power. But behind the glamour, these legends carried secrets no one expected. A sex symbol who secretly helped invent Wi-Fi. A comedy genius who played the violin with heartbreaking grace. And a cold goddess who, offset, could mimic her colleagues so perfectly that crews were left in tears of laughter. Hollywood's brightest stars were not just actors. They were hidden virtuosos. What happens when the spotlight fades and the curtain falls? Today, we lift the veil on the shocking hidden talents of Hollywood's golden age. From the 1932nd to the 1972nd, Hollywood reigned as the dream factory of the world. But for all the fame and glitter, many of its stars nurtured gifts that rarely made it to the headlines. These talents, secret passions, artistic obsessions, even scientific breakthroughs show us a side of these legends we've never truly known. In this episode, we'll explore 14 classic Hollywood stars, each harboring a hidden skill that could have rewritten their destiny. Some were playful, some were profound, and a few downright unbelievable. Get ready, because by the end of this journey, you may never look at your favorite Hollywood icons the same way again. Hedy Lamarr, hidden genius behind the glamour. They called her the most beautiful woman in the world. On screen, Hedy Lamarr was an icon of seduction, the goddess draped in jewels and gowns, her eyes alone enough to hold audiences captive. Hollywood painted her as a creature of glamour and desire, a woman to be admired, never questioned. But away from the camera, Lamarr's mind burned with curiosity. She spent long nights sketching inventions on scrap paper, tinkering with new designs when the rest of Hollywood was chasing parties and premieres. Science, not fame, was her secret refuge. During World War II, as Europe collapsed into chaos, Lamarr refused to be just a face on a poster. Together with avant-garde composer George Antheil, she began work on an idea that had nothing to do with cinema, a way to guide Allied torpedoes using radio signals that could never be jammed. They called it frequency hopping, a concept so radical it baffled experts of the day. Yet, in an industry and an era that worshipped appearances, no one wanted to believe that the bombshell of Samson and Delilah could also be an inventor. The US Navy tucked her patent away, the studios ignored it, and the world went on thinking of Hedy Lamarr only as a star to be looked at, not listened to. Her brilliance was silenced under layers of lipstick and press clippings. Decades later, her design would resurface not as a forgotten curiosity, but as the backbone of wireless communication, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS. The technology that powers our lives today carries the fingerprints of a woman who was once told to stand still and look pretty. Hedy Lamarr herself once said, "Any girl can be glamorous. All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." What she never revealed was that while she was standing still for the cameras, her mind was already racing into the future, quietly inventing the world we live in now. Charlie Chaplin, the silent comedian who composed symphonies. To the world, he was the tramp, the little man with the bowler hat, the cane, and the awkward shuffle that made millions laugh. Charlie Chaplin's genius seemed inseparable from silence. His comedy was movement, not words. Audiences thought they knew him completely. But Chaplin carried another gift, one that spoke in melodies rather than gags. Long before he became a filmmaker, Chaplin had fallen in love with the violin. He would spend hours practicing, teaching himself to play by ear. He never mastered reading sheet music in the traditional sense, but he didn't need to. Music lived inside him, and he drew it out on the strings. When he began directing films, that hidden passion quietly followed him onto the set. While the world saw him as a clown, Chaplin was in fact composing. The poignant scores of City Lights and Modern Times, the very music that swelled behind the tramp's heartbreak and triumph, were his own creations. He would pick up a violin or a cello, experimenting until he found the melody that perfectly matched a chase, a kiss, or a silent tear. The man who never spoke on screen was, in truth, telling stories through music that could make the heart ache. Critics of the time barely noticed. Hollywood wanted Chaplin the comic, not Chaplin the composer. His scores were dismissed as curiosities, overshadowed by the laughter he inspired. But time has a way of setting the record straight. Today, orchestras perform his music in concert halls around the world. Audiences who once knew him only for slapstick now hear the depth of emotion he poured into every note. Chaplin once observed, "Life is a tragedy when seen in close-up, but a comedy in long shot." Perhaps that is why he turned to music. Because music could hold both the laughter and the sorrow, the joke and the wound, within a single, trembling chord. Greta Garbo, the ice goddess who could make the world laugh. On screen, she was untouchable. Greta Garbo, the Swedish Sphinx, moved through Hollywood like a figure carved from marble, her beauty almost too perfect, her presence almost too distant. In the 1932nd, she became the embodiment of mystery, a woman audiences longed to know but never could. "I want to be alone," she famously said, and the world believed her. But behind the veil of silence and elegance, Garbo hid a secret that only her closest colleagues ever saw. She was funny, not just witty, but devastatingly accurate in her imitations. Between takes, when the cameras had stopped rolling and the studio walls were free of journalists, Garbo would suddenly shift her posture, her voice, her expression transforming into a perfect caricature of a fellow star. She could mimic Marlene Dietrich's smoky drawl, Clark Gable's easy swagger, even the nervous stammer of the very studio executives who built her icy image. The same woman who appeared untouchable on screen could reduce an entire crew to tears of laughter. It was as if the goddess had stepped down from her pedestal just long enough to reveal she was human and mischievously so. Yet this side of her was kept hidden, locked away behind the walls of MGM. The studio sold her as a mystery, and Garbo, bound by the rules of an unforgiving system, never let the public glimpse the warmth and humor she shared in private. For audiences, she remained forever remote, forever tragic. But for those who knew her directors, co-stars, crew, Greta Garbo was also the queen of parody, a secret comedian trapped in the body of a goddess. And perhaps that was the greatest irony of all. The woman who made the world weep with her tragedies could, in the right company, make them laugh harder than anyone else. James Stewart, the all-American star with an accordion. James Stewart was the very image of America's favorite son, tall, soft-spoken, with that unmistakable drawl that made every line sound honest and true. From Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to It's a Wonderful Life, he became the symbol of decency on screen, the man who always stood for what was right. Audiences adored him because they thought they knew him, the earnest hero, the man next door. But those who worked with Stewart knew another side of him, one that rarely reached beyond the studio gates. Between takes, when the weight of his roles grew heavy, he would pull out a battered accordion and start to play. Sometimes it was a jaunty tune, sometimes a sweet melody drifting through the soundstage, but it always transformed the atmosphere. The crew who moments earlier had been exhausted or tense suddenly found themselves smiling, their spirits lifted by the unexpected music. The accordion was Stewart's secret weapon, a way to remind himself and everyone around him that joy could be simple. He never flaunted the talent, never sought to turn it into another career. For him, it was a private language, a way to bridge the gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary. While fans believed him to be just the quintessential everyman, his colleagues remembered the music, the way it softened his presence and made long days feel a little shorter. Today, when we revisit Stewart's films, it is easy to get lost in the warmth of his characters. But hidden beneath that gentle voice and humble smile was a musician's soul, quietly playing in the shadows of Hollywood's golden age. Rita Hayworth, the goddess of love who danced in fire. To the world, Rita Hayworth was the ultimate pinup, the red-haired enchantress whose image was painted on the noses of World War II bombers and pinned to the walls of soldiers' bunks across the globe. She was the love goddess, a vision of desire and glamour, the woman who could stop time with a glance. But before Hollywood remade her into an icon, Rita was Margarita Cancino, the daughter of Spanish dancers, trained from childhood in the discipline of flamenco. Long before the bright lights of Columbia Pictures, she had lived in rehearsal studios, her heels striking the floor in fiery rhythm, her arms carving shapes through the air with precision and grace. Dance was her first language, the art that shaped her body and her soul. When she came to Hollywood, the studios straightened her hair, lightened her skin, and taught her to play the part of an American beauty. Her Spanish heritage was subdued, her dancer spirit folded into a new identity crafted for mass appeal. Yet on quiet evenings, or in rare stage appearances, the old fire would return. Those who witnessed her flamenco performances spoke of a Rita Hayworth far removed from the pinup image, fierce, commanding, alive with a power that no camera could fully capture. Hollywood immortalized her in satin gowns and slow-motion close-ups, but the truth was that Rita Hayworth belonged to rhythm and movement. Beneath the glittering image of the love goddess burned the heart of a dancer, trained in a tradition as old and passionate as Spain itself. And perhaps that was why her screen presence felt so magnetic. Every turn of her head, every sway of her hips carried the memory of flamenco, its fire, its sorrow, its defiance. Rita was not only created by Hollywood, she had been forged in the dance long before the world ever called her a star. Anthony Quinn, the rugged actor who painted his soul. On screen, Anthony Quinn was the embodiment of raw power. With his broad frame and commanding presence, he played warriors, bandits, and outcasts, the kind of roles that required fire in the eyes and strength in the body. In films like Zorba the Greek, he became larger than life, a man who seemed made of earth and stone. Yet when the camera stopped rolling, Quinn sought something gentler, something that demanded not rage, but patience. In his private world, he turned to brushes, clay, and canvas. Long before Hollywood claimed him, he had studied art and architecture, carrying sketchbooks wherever he went. While the public remembered him as a force of nature on screen, Quinn himself often said that painting and sculpting were his truest forms of expression. In hotel rooms between shoots, he would set up makeshift studios, letting his hands create images that the world would never see. Sculptures emerged with the same intensity he brought to his characters, but instead of fleeting performances, these works carried permanence, frozen moments of thought and feeling. Over time, his creations found their way into galleries, exhibitions that revealed a hidden Quinn, not just an actor, but an artist whose canvases throbbed with color and life. Hollywood audiences saw him as untamed, wild, a man of action. But those who knew him well understood that his fiercest battles were fought quietly, against the empty page, the silent block of stone, the canvas waiting for its first stroke of paint. Anthony Quinn left behind not only a body of film that defined an era, but also a legacy of art that spoke of his inner world, a place where strength gave way to vulnerability, and where the rugged star revealed the painter of his soul. Clint Eastwood, the cowboy who spoke in jazz. For generations, Clint Eastwood has been etched into memory as the steely-eyed cowboy, the man with no name, standing silent in the dust of Sergio Leone's westerns. Later, as Dirty Harry, he became the lawman whose cold stare and gravel voice defined toughness. His very image was one of restraint-sparse words, decisive violence, the quiet power of a man who never flinched. But when the lights dimmed and the set fell silent, Eastwood turned not to guns, but to a piano. Music had been his first love, long before Hollywood ever called. He taught himself to play jazz, disappearing into smoky improvisations that revealed a soul far softer than the characters he portrayed. Behind closed doors, his hands danced across the keys with a fluidity that few ever imagined possible from the world's most famous cowboy. In the rare moments when he let this side of himself slip into the public eye, it startled even his fans. He once confessed he had dreamed of being a jazz musician, not an actor. And in later years, he would produce film scores himself, infusing his movies with the quiet melancholy of piano. It was in those melodies, gentle, wistful, alive with rhythm, that Eastwood seemed most vulnerable, most human. The world knew him as a man who spoke with bullets, yet those who heard him at the piano discovered a voice even more eloquent, one that carried sorrow, longing, and tenderness in every note. Clint Eastwood, the eternal cowboy, was also a jazzman, and perhaps it was the music that gave his silence such depth. Audrey Hepburn, the swan who never took flight. To the world, Audrey Hepburn was the epitome of elegance. With her doe-like eyes, swan-like neck, and effortless grace, she became the face of an era breakfast at Tiffany's Roman holiday Sabrina. She seemed born to inhabit the screen, the embodiment of poise and sophistication. Yet few knew that acting had never been her first dream. Before Hollywood, before fame, Hepburn had dedicated herself to the discipline of ballet. As a girl growing up in war-torn Europe, she trained relentlessly, dreaming of a life as a prima ballerina. In dusty studios with cracked mirrors, she repeated movements until her feet bled, until her body knew music as instinct. Even as bombs fell and hunger gnawed during the Second World War, she clung to dance as both salvation and escape. But war had taken its toll. Malnutrition during her teenage years left her too frail to pursue ballet at a professional level. The dream that had carried her through her darkest nights slipped beyond reach. And so she turned, almost reluctantly, to acting. There, the discipline of ballet, the posture, the grace, the economy of movement followed her onto the screen. Every turn of her head, every tilt of her hand bore the signature of a dancer's training. The world adored her as an actress, never realizing that what they were truly seeing was the ghost of the ballerina she might have been. Audrey Hepburn carried herself like a swan gliding across water because, in her heart, she had once belonged to the stage. In the end, her ballet career never took flight, but it shaped the woman who became one of cinema's most enduring icons. And perhaps it is that hint of something lost, something the world was never allowed to see, that gives her screen presence its quiet, haunting beauty. Cary Grant, the gentleman who came from the circus. Cary Grant is remembered as the epitome of Hollywood charm, the perfectly tailored suit, the sly smile, the effortless wit that made him the model of sophistication. In films like North by Northwest and An Affair to Remember, he embodied refinement, the gentleman every man wanted to be and every woman wanted to love. But long before the tuxedos and champagne flutes, Grant, then still Archibald Leach, was a boy running away from hardship in England. He found refuge not in the theater at first, but under the canvas of a traveling circus. There, among acrobats and clowns, he learned to tumble, to balance, to swing high above the ground. He mastered stilt walking, somersaults, and aerial tricks, skills that demanded precision, daring, and control. These weren't just youthful diversions, they shaped him. The grace with which he dodged across a rooftop in Hitchcock's thrillers, the impeccable timing of his comedic pratfalls, even the way he moved through a room in a dinner jacket, all of it was born from those early days of physical discipline. While audiences saw a polished gentleman, beneath the surface was a circus performer who never forgot the rhythm of the high wire. Hollywood carefully sculpted his image into that of the suave leading man, erasing the rough edges of his past. Few fans ever knew that Cary Grant's elegance was, in truth, a circus trick perfected over years of balancing on stilts and flying through the air. Perhaps that's why his charm felt different from anyone else's. It wasn't just cultivated, it was earned, through sweat and risk and the daring of a boy who had once defied gravity. Cary Grant became Hollywood's ultimate gentleman because, long before, he had been something wilder, a performer who learned how to fall and how to land gracefully. Marlene Dietrich, the diva who sang through the war. Marlene Dietrich was every inch the Hollywood diva. With her smoky voice, tailored suits, and the sultry gaze that became her trademark, she redefined glamour for the modern age. On screen, she was untouchable, a woman who commanded desire and respect in equal measure. To the world, she was the shimmering star draped in satin and shadows. Yet when the world was at war, Dietrich revealed a side far removed from the spotlight. At the height of her career, she set aside the comforts of stardom and traveled to the front lines. Instead of singing for adoring audiences in gilded theaters, she performed for weary soldiers in muddy camps, her voice drifting through the night air like a lifeline. She sang old ballads, jazz standards, and German folk songs, giving men far from home a moment of solace. a reminder of humanity in a landscape of chaos. For Dietrich, it was more than performance, it was defiance. Born in Germany, she publicly renounced the Nazi regime and embraced her adopted country, the United States. Her decision came at a cost. She was branded a traitor by the land of her birth, her films banned, her name cursed. But she stood firm, trading glamour for grit, fame for conviction. Those who witnessed her wartime shows remembered not the star, but the courage. Dressed in simple military gear, with only a spotlight and a microphone, Dietrich gave herself entirely to the soldiers. In those moments, she wasn't Hollywood's untouchable icon. She was a comrade, a sister, a beacon of hope. When the war ended, she returned to the screen, her legend intact. But for many who had heard her sing under foreign skies, her greatest role was not that of femme fatale or starlet. It was that of a woman who used her voice to fight, comfort, and endure. Marlene Dietrich was, and always will be, a diva. But in the darkness of war, her true power wasn't seduction. It was song. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler who truly lived the adventure. Few actors embodied adventure the way Errol Flynn did. With his rakish grin, broad shoulders, and sword always at the ready, he became the definitive swashbuckler of Hollywood's golden age. In films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, he seemed born to duel, leap, and conquer. To audiences, Flynn wasn't playing a hero, he was one. But what many never realized was that his on-screen swordsmanship wasn't simply choreography. Flynn was a true master of fencing, trained in the art long before Hollywood handed him a prop blade. His movements fluid, fearless, precise, were authentic, honed through rigorous practice. When he clashed swords on screen, the sparks of steel carried the weight of real skill. And his appetite for adventure didn't end when the director called cut. Flynn lived with the same recklessness he portrayed, setting sail on expeditions, chasing storms, and writing of his exploits with a flair that blurred the line between fact and myth. He wasn't content to merely act the part. He sought out danger, challenge, and discovery in his own life. This restless spirit made him a legend, but also a cautionary tale. His excesses became as notorious as his charm, his adventures often sliding into scandal. Yet even as his personal life unraveled, the image of Flynn with a sword in hand endured a man who fought with style, laughed in the face of peril, and lived as if life itself were one long duel. Errol Flynn died young, but his legacy is forever tied to both the characters he played and the man he truly was. A master fencer, an adventurer, and a reminder that sometimes Hollywood's illusions are closer to truth than we imagine. Fred Astaire, the dancer who kept rhythm on the drums. Fred Astaire's name is synonymous with dance. Graceful, effortless, and eternally elegant, he turned motion into poetry. In films like Top Hat and Swing Time, he floated across the screen as though gravity itself had been charmed into submission. For decades, audiences believed they knew his secret precision, rehearsal, and a body built to dance. But Astaire carried another rhythm, one hidden behind the curtains. When the music stopped and his shoes were set aside, Astaire often reached not for a partner, but for a drum. He was a skilled percussionist, able to coax rhythms from sticks and skins as naturally as he tapped them out on marble floors. Drumming was more than a pastime. It was the heartbeat beneath his choreography. The syncopation, the precision, the musicality that defined his dance came from a drummer's instinct, an understanding of rhythm at its most primal. Those who saw him in private rehearsals often remembered the moments when Astaire would step away from the piano or phonograph, pick up a pair of sticks, and create a rhythm so infectious that musicians couldn't help but follow. It was in those beats, sharp, playful, alive, that one glimpsed the source of his genius. Hollywood celebrated him as the king of tap, the man who made dance eternal. But behind the shine of his polished shoes lay a quieter truth. Fred Astaire was not only moving to the rhythm, he was making it. Perhaps that is why his performances felt so complete. They weren't just steps, they were music made flesh. A drummer's pulse translated into motion, forever etched into the memory of cinema. Elizabeth Taylor, the screen goddess who designed in diamonds. Elizabeth Taylor was Hollywood royalty. With her violet eyes and magnetic presence, she reigned as both star and scandal, the kind of actress whose very life became front-page news. Audiences knew her for grand romances, tempestuous marriages, and a career that spanned from National Velvet to Cleopatra. To the world, she was excess and extravagance made flesh. But Taylor's passion for beauty didn't end at costumes and camera lenses. Away from the set, she became a devoted student of design, channeling her eye for elegance into the world of jewelry. It began as a love affair: diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires gifted by husbands and admirers. Yet over time, Taylor's fascination deepened into something more serious. She studied settings, learned the histories of stones, and even began sketching her own designs. Her collection grew into one of the most famous in the world, not simply for its price tags, but for its artistry. Pieces she wore to premieres or personal gatherings often carried her own touches, rings, and necklaces shaped by her ideas, her sense of what beauty should feel like when held against the skin. Later, when many of these jewels were sold at auction, they fetched hundreds of millions, not only because they belonged to Elizabeth Taylor, but because they bore her creative imprint. For fans, she will always be Cleopatra, Maggie the Cat, the eternal siren of the screen. But among gemologists and collectors, Taylor is remembered as more than a wearer of jewels. She was a designer, a curator, an artist whose vision sparkled as brightly as the stones she adored. Elizabeth Taylor proved that her eye for beauty wasn't confined to the camera's gaze. It lived in every gem she touched, every piece she shaped, every diamond that bore the story of a woman who knew both passion and artistry in equal measure. Kirk Douglas, the gladiator who found peace in paint. Kirk Douglas was the face of defiance. With his cleft chin, burning eyes, and explosive intensity, he embodied a certain kind of Hollywood masculinity, fierce, uncompromising, larger than life. From Spartacus to Paths of Glory, he fought, raged, and stood as the man who would never yield. To audiences, he was steel and fire, a gladiator both on and off the screen. But away from the glare of the spotlight, Douglas carried a quieter obsession. In his solitude, he turned to brushes and canvases, seeking expression not through shouts and battles, but through color and form. Painting became his refuge, a way to wrestle with emotions too complex for words, too private for an audience. Those who visited his home often found canvases propped against the walls, landscapes, portraits, abstractions, works not meant for display, but for the man himself. They revealed a Kirk Douglas far removed from the warrior image, one who searched for peace in each brushstroke, who let his hand wander until it found the shapes his heart could not speak aloud. Later in life, he even exhibited some of these works, and critics were startled to find that beneath the hard exterior of the gladiator was the sensitivity of a painter. In his films, he was always fighting against enemies, against injustice, against fate itself. But with a brush in hand, he found something else: stillness. The kind of stillness a man discovers only when the battle is done, when the armor is set aside, and the soul is left to breathe. Kirk Douglas will always be remembered as Spartacus, the man who refused to bow. Yet his paintings remind us that strength is not only measured in defiance. Sometimes it lives quietly, in the patient layering of paint, in the private act of creating beauty from silence. They came to us as gods and goddesses, etched forever in black and white frames and technicolor dreams. We thought we knew them, their smiles, their scandals, their immortal roles. But behind the silver screen, they carried secrets, music tucked into their fingers, rhythms in their feet, brushstrokes in their hands, and inventions in their minds. Hedy Lamarr, whose beauty masked a genius that changed the way the world communicates. Charlie Chaplin, the silent clown who composed symphonies of sorrow and joy. Greta Garbo, the untouchable goddess who could make her colleagues collapse in laughter. From Eastwood's jazz piano to Audrey's lost ballet. From Cary Grant's circus tricks to Shirley Temple's dazzling taps, each star reminds us that talent cannot be confined to one stage alone. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Hollywood's golden age. Not just the films they left behind, but the unseen worlds they carried within them. Worlds of rhythm, invention, art, and imagination, fragments of humanity hidden beneath the glitter. So the next time you watch an old reel flicker to life, remember, you are not just seeing an actor. You are glimpsing a soul, layered with gifts, with contradictions, with stories untold. That is why their presence lingers, long after the curtain has fallen. Because in the end, the greatest performance of all may be the one they never showed us.